Let's start at the beginning. It was April 8th, 2025, and I was 3 months into an unplanned trip around the world. I had just spent a few months in Southeast Asia where my YouTube channel had finally gotten a bit of traction, and I knew if I wanted to ride the momentum, I had to do something big. So I started thinking about doing a mega trip across India, a country that has an infamous reputation as being one of the hardest places on earth to travel. It was the perfect challenge, not just as a YouTuber, but as a man. I already backpacked across South America the previous year, and had just finished a large part of Southeast Asia, and was ready for the greatest challenge yet. People say India can break you, and I wanted to see if I had what it took. So from the nearby island of Sri Lanka, with my Indian visa in hand, I boarded a one-way flight to Chennai, and when I stepped onto Indian soil, I had no idea that the next 4 months of my life would be the most emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually impactful months that I had ever lived. But now let's start the story here on April 8th, my first day in India. Suddenly, I found myself in a new world, and nothing prepares you for India like your first day in an Indian city. It's overwhelming at first. The noise, the smell, the colors, and everything moving so fast all at once. I was lucky enough to have a local friend I met at my hostel to show me around the city. We went to a temple where I got my first glimpse of Hinduism, and let me tell you, the temples in Chennai are some of the most beautiful in all of India. We then went to the coast, getting a view of the city from above and seeing just how endless and sprawling it truly was. But then, my friend had to leave for work, and I was now wandering the vast city all by myself, trying street food for the first time and getting my first taste of delicious Indian chai. I wandered the city for hours, visiting temples, talking to people in the streets, and visiting the beach, which looked like the set of a post-apocalyptic movie, littered with sand-covered stalls with trash blowing all over the place. I then risked my life on a Ferris wheel that had no seatbelt or any kind of safety straps. The only thing keeping me from falling to my death was physically holding onto the railing and praying I didn't fall. But I needed to head back to the hostel, because one thing about Chennai is temperatures can reach up to 40 degrees Celsius or over 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, turning the city into an oven with 13 million inhabitants. So I went back to my hostel to rest before making some more new friends that night when it was safe enough to go out again. But I knew it wasn't smart to stay here long. The heat would melt me alive. I wasn't used to it. Plus, there was a whole continent I was eager to get out and start exploring. So with help from some local friends, I got a ticket on a 14-hour night bus to head into the mountains of Tamil Nadu to the hill station of Kodaikanal, a place that I hoped would offer some relief from the relentless Chennai heat. So I grabbed my backpack, said goodbye to my new friends, and after a tuk-tuk ride across the city, I set out on my first Indian bus journey in search of better weather. Alright, you guys, this is my home for the next 10 to 12 hours. This sleeper bus here in India. So I'm climbing up, man. This is what you get for about $20 here in India. I think it's pretty nice, man. You get this comfortable bed, you know, I'll be able to recline. I don't have to share with anyone either. I'll show you guys outside. A little bit of chaos here. Oh, it's actually alright. But yeah, I'll be on this sleeper bus for something like, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 hours. We're going to Kodaikanal, which is the beginning of the tea region here in southern India. Kodaikanal was a breath of fresh air. Literally, it was just way colder and had way less people. It was exactly what I needed. And luckily, I made even more new friends that I explored the area with. We went hiking in the forests, explored some of the famous viewpoints in the town, and got to see the famous caves of Kodaikanal, famous in local legend and made even more famous by a Bollywood movie. I also tried playing cricket for the first time in my life, which I thought went well, but my friend Chandra thought otherwise. Pathetic! And after a few days of chilling in the mountains, and after a night around the campfire, laughing and singing songs with my new friends, it was time to move on to my next town, and on to my next state in India. Because in the morning, I was starting the long and complicated journey into Kerala, to the town of Munnar, world famous for its gorgeous tea fields. But to get there, I would need to catch 3 different local buses to cross the imposing mountains that separate Tamil Nadu and Kerala. It was going to be my first real test in India, and I wanted to see if I could travel like a local. Luckily, one of my friends joined me for the first bus, and after a bit of scrambling to find it, and a beautiful journey through the mountains of Tamil Nadu, we parted ways in a small town somewhere near the Kerala border, and I got on my second bus, which took me into a small town where I caught my next bus, and this one took a long time. I spent 4 hours traveling so far this day, and this bus was another 5 hours, packed 3 deep into a small metal bus seat on an overcrowded local bus into Kerala. But it was a beautiful journey. I got to see the sunset over the lush mountains of southern India, and then cruised into the tea fields that evening. Feeling sore all over, I collapsed into my bed, exhausted but proud that I had made it into a new state. And what a state it was. They say Kerala is called God's own country, and even on my first day in the state, I could see why. Munnar is a little slice of heaven in the mountains. Everywhere you look, you can see lush, deep, green sea of tea covering the cascading hills and mountains that litter the countryside. I spent a good few days enjoying the views, enjoying the tea, and spending lots of time reading my new book, Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, a book about a young priest's son who traveled across India on a spiritual journey during the time of the Buddha. A book I could relate to in many ways as a young man traveling alone across a colorful and foreign land. But as always, after a few days in this little green heaven, I hailed a bus on the side of the highway, and after a few hours of traveling down the mountains, I arrived in the bustling city of Kochi, full of colorful communist graffiti, beautiful ocean views, and one of the most legendary shops in the world of Indian street food. Kochi is famous for these guys. They just throw the glass around like crazy and make a huge show. So that's one of the main reasons I came to Kochi, is to see this. It's pretty exciting. This is a street food legend here in India. Ooh. Oh my gosh. Ooh. Thank you, bro. 50, right? 50. Okay, man. Wow. And here we go with the 50 rupee shaken crazy drink on the streets of Kochi. Let's give it a try. Oh, it's good. It's like iced coffee. Kochi was a town I thoroughly enjoyed. Of all the cities I visited in India, I think it has to be the most laid-back vibe. The people are friendly, the old town is littered with colorful Portuguese buildings, and the food is amazing. A unique blend of Indian and Arab tastes, and after talking with some locals, I now knew exactly where I was headed next. I jumped on a local train heading south, and after a few hours of sailing on a surprisingly empty train, gliding across the endless green jungles of the Kerala countryside, I arrived in Alleppey, home of one of Kerala's nicest beaches and the world-famous backwaters, a series of inland rivers that make up one of the most unique ecosystems in all of India. I jumped on a local boat for a few dollars and spent the day sailing through the jungle. It was true what they say, this really is God's country. The next place in Kerala was one of my favorite places in all of India, and after hopping on another local train headed south, I stopped off at a small town in the jungle and hiked across a railway track over a river, then caught a local bus into town, finally hopping on another train headed south until I finally reached my destination, the beach town of Varkala. I spent over a week in this town, all at the same hostel where I made a ton of friends. I was the only foreigner there, but that didn't matter. We spent our days swimming in the sea, playing cards all day, drinking, smoking, laughing, and making sure to catch the sunsets over the Arabian Sea every night. It was one of my best weeks in India, and I had a lot of time to read, even enough to finish my new book. And even though Siddhartha's story had come to an end, mine was just beginning. But of course, like all places, it was eventually time to leave. I said my goodbyes to my friends and hopped on a train heading back north to Kochi. My time in Kerala was unfortunately coming to an end, and I had a big journey ahead of me. It's a funny thing about traveling. You create some amazing memories with people you might never see again. It's beautifully tragic, but that's life. And I had no time to dwell on the past. So I just boarded a bus heading north from Kochi with no plan, and I decided I'd figure it out all along the way. 12 hours and a few different buses later, I arrived in Wayanad, a small town in the mountains of northern Kerala, right on the border of a new state, Karnataka, the next state on my journey north. And after climbing a mountain and getting lost in the countryside of Kerala one last time, I hitchhiked to the bus station, and as I boarded a bus for a small town in Karnataka, I said my final goodbye to Kerala. Not just one of my favorite places in India, but one of my favorite places in the world. My journey into Karnataka was a bit of a mess. After waiting hours for a bus to Mysore, the city I was trying to get to, I finally caught one, but there were no seats. So like a true Indian local, I had to stand on the bus for about 3 hours until a seat opened up, and I finally arrived in the city of Mysore. It was an interesting city, with a massive royal palace I was lucky enough to see a free light show at. I spent my days there exploring the colorful and vibrant markets and getting a feel for the more classic Indian city vibe, full of cows wandering the streets, with trash piled on the sides of roads, eccentric vendors selling all sorts of delicious treats, and all sorts of chaos found in your typical Indian city. But after a few days here, I caught a bus to the nearby mega city of Bangalore, home to 14 million people, one of them being Chandra, who was kind enough to let me stay at his apartment for a while I explored the city. I stayed here for a few days, checking out different restaurants and bars, but soon got sick of city life and decided to continue my journey. And I started my journey to the biggest city I had ever been to in my entire life. Mumbai is chaos incarnate. 20 million people packed into a steaming concrete jungle. The traffic is unending, the crowds are endless, the pollution is terrible, but the city has this strange energy. Like anything can happen at any time. One second you're eating dinner in a fancy Italian restaurant in Bandra, and the next you're in a tuk-tuk passing a cow eating trash off the street. The trains are like a sport. People pushing and shoving just to get an inch ahead. There's no mercy in Mumbai. I spent days wandering the streets, testing my stomach with the street food and trying to soak in the unique atmosphere of the city. But the poverty here is like nowhere else. I couldn't go to a bar or a restaurant without kids coming up to me to beg. Mumbai probably has the worst wealth gap on the planet. While the rich dine in luxury in Churchgate, the poor eat whatever they can get their hands on in the slums of Dharavi. Mumbai left me confused. I had fun experiencing the local trains and walking the streets, but thinking about what it would actually take to live here left me anxious. It's truly a city you can only begin to understand by experiencing it. I've told friends that no country is as intense as India, and no city in India is as intense as Mumbai. It's a city that made me feel grateful, shameful, greedy, selfless, happy, anxious, and proud. I was definitely a long way from home. Leaving Mumbai, I eventually found my way up to Udaipur, the famous city of lakes, a gorgeous place of colorful buildings and colorful characters. I befriended a local artist when I was there, a painter and wise man. I helped him out around his studio for a day in exchange for some chai, stories, and smokes. We talked about life, art, traveling, and love. He had a lot of wise quotes, but my favorite was something he said to me on a tea break. Time is running faster than we can run, so why run with time? I took this to mean that life's not a race, and it's not a straight line. Things happen when they happen. People come into your life and leave your life, and everything changes. But just like you can't fight time, you can't fight change. We might not be able to outrun time, but we can definitely make the most of the time that we do have. I passed a few more days in Udaipur, taking in the calm atmosphere and the gorgeous scenery, until I heard a story about a holy city, far out in the deserts of Rajasthan, home to one of the most important temples in all of India, the holy city of Pushkar. So I grabbed my bag, hopped on a train, and began my pilgrimage to Pushkar. After a long and hot train ride across the deserts of Rajasthan, I arrived in the sand-covered streets of Pushkar late at night and collapsed into a cheap hostel bed. Waking that morning, I was reminded of why I had come to this town in the first place, for the temple of Brahma. Take my explanation with a grain of salt. I'm no Hindu theologist, but as I understand it, Brahma is one of the most important gods in Hinduism. He is the creator god, the one responsible for bringing the universe into being. But for whatever reason, of all the temples in India, there is only one to Brahma. And it's a temple that locals told me only should be visited once in a single lifetime, and I had come for my one and only visit. I'm not gonna lie, I was worried about visiting the temple. To do something so important that it should be done just once in a lifetime is something you should do right. I decided that I would spend the day preparing myself for the eventual visit to the temple. Pushkar is an oasis town, centered around a large lake with a shrine at the center on an island. Surrounding the lake are dozens of smaller temples, and wild cows roam free along the ancient sandstone-covered shoreline. I decided I would follow their lead, and that I would walk around the lake barefoot 3 times, meditating at temples along the way. So I kicked my shoes off and began the slow march around the lake. I walked past cows napping in the sun, past monkeys fighting over food, past old men praying, past kids playing, and past temples seemingly older than time itself. I walked until my feet burned and until the desert sun made my vision hazy. I took breaks in the shade and in the temples when I needed to, remembering the advice of my old friend from Udaipur to listen to nature. And after quite a lot of walking, I came back to where I began on my third trip around the lake. I put on my shoes, bought some water, and went for a long nap. When I woke up, I knew it was time to head to the temple, so I walked across the town and joined the long line of pilgrims waiting to enter the ancient stone temple. After about 20 minutes, I followed the crowd inside to a large courtyard with a small shrine in the middle, and after following the crowd to the shrine, I looked inside to see the statue of Brahma. A four-headed, robed figure wearing a crown. It had what looked like rubies as eyes, and I made direct eye contact with the statue for a few minutes until I was eventually removed by temple security for staying in the shrine too long. I felt an immense sense of peace rush over me, like the world was a perfect and harmonious place, and I was a part of this divine harmony. I felt like I was almost high, or in some kind of trance, like I was floating instead of walking, and fully at peace with the world. This effect would soon be shattered, because when I left the temple feeling so full of this peaceful energy, I let my guard down, and fell for a scam I normally would never have fallen for. A local brought me to the lake to give a free offering to honor God. Of course it wasn't free, and shortly after we placed some flowers in the river as an offering, he demanded $100 as a donation to God. This selfish act shattered the peaceful energy I had gotten from the temple and replaced it with a kind of rage I have never felt in my entire life. I got in the scammer's face and started screaming at him and threatening him. He was rightfully very shaken and quickly ran away, forgetting about his money, but even though I beat the scam, the damage was done. I had gone from an extreme high to now plummeting to an extreme low. Never in my life have I experienced such a rapid shift in my emotions as I did that day in Pushkar. Quickly turned around, however, when I met 3 friendly kids who wanted nothing but to just meditate with me and play around in the lake. We chanted Om Nah Shiva together, and after some time by the lake, I began to feel better. I met another friendly local that night too, who helped arrange a camel ride for me during the sunset. He helped me get a good price, and I enjoyed a 2-hour ride through the deserts of Rajasthan on the back of a friendly camel. He told me his life story and how he lost his business to COVID. I decided to help him out with some money for food, even though he didn't ask for it. After the camel ride and the intensity of the day, I thought it was about time to leave Pushkar. I had visited the temple and completed my once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage, so the following day I caught a local bus to Jaipur, the Pink City, and began planning my next big trip across India. Despite being one of the most popular tourist destinations in India, Jaipur is a city I'm not very fond of. I visited during the summer, which is my own fault, but still, the heat was unbearable every day I was there. And the city, although having some pretty buildings and views from the fort, just felt like your typical overcrowded and overpolluted Indian city. I felt it lacked the character of cities like Mumbai and Kochi, and despite meeting some friendly people, there was an insane amount of scammers that left a really bad impression on me. I knew I had to get out, and with the sun melting my brain, I knew I needed some cold weather. So I hatched a plan to go to the very top of India, the ancient and mystical Himalayas, and after a few days figuring out how to make the long journey, I jumped on my first of 3 long buses that would take me into the greatest mountain range in the world. After 3 days of travel and being in buses for nearly 30 hours, I reached the sleepy town of Buntar, my first town in the Himalayas, and where I decided to start my first Himalayan trek. After a day of rest, I slung my bag over my shoulder and started my solo 2-day trek to the ancient village of Malana, a place like nowhere else in the world. But my first step was to reach the trailhead, and that was a day's hike away in the village of Jari. I had 23 kilometers to walk and clear skies, and at the first glimpse of the Himalayas, I knew this place was special. There's an energy in the mountains like nothing else I've felt on Earth. It's a calm, ancient, and mystical energy, and the second I was in the mountains, I felt it. I was exactly where I needed to be at that moment, and every fiber of my being, I knew that this was where I needed to be. And with the excitement and immense feeling of gratitude for a cool mountain breeze, I walked my 23 kilometers with a smile on my face, enjoying the serenity of the Parvati Valley. After the day of hiking, I was exhausted, and after arriving at Kasol Hostel in Jari village, I met some great friends who shared with me the other thing the Himalayas are famous for, having some of the best hashish in the world. And with a rainstorm trapping me inside for the next few days, I smoked and laughed the days away with my new friends, getting some much-needed rest after the massive journey. But on the 3rd day in the village, I woke up at sunrise ready to make the 15-kilometer trek up the mountain to Malana village. As I walked into one of the most isolated regions of the Himalayas, I thought about the village I was heading to. Malana village is one of the most fascinating places in India. They speak a language unrelated to any other Indian language. They have an ancient religion different than anywhere else on earth. The village has a strict set of rules where you cannot touch anything or anyone at the punishment of banishment or stoning, which makes even buying water a task, as you have to place the money on the floor as if they touch your hand by accident, it would be a big problem. And lastly, there's a local legend about the village, that they are supposedly the long-lost descendants of ancient Greek soldiers who were stranded in India during Alexander the Great's failed invasion nearly 2,500 years ago. It's easy for me to say that this village absolutely captured my imagination, and the fact it's only accessible by a perilous 15-kilometer trek in what's already a very isolated mountainous region, I knew I had to visit. And after 5 hours of trekking and nearly getting lost once or twice, I turned a corner and got my first glimpse of Malana village. You step foot in Malana, you step back in time. People wear traditional clothes and give you skeptical looks. The houses are ancient and traditional, and there are literal fields of weed growing all over the town, sprouting up randomly across the town like a stoner's Garden of Eden. I thought it would be fun to try and buy some things with the village no-touching rule. So I found a shop and asked for some water and some chips and got to experience the famous Malana no-touching rule. Okay, there you go. First time coming Malana, yes. First time. Jack. Ah, thank you. Ooh. But as you can see, guys, they wouldn't even let me stand on the shop. I had to put my money on the floor. They put this on the floor. And then they'll come back and put my change on the floor. It's very interesting. I can't leave my water bottle on the floor either. So we're going to do a quick loop of this center town. Eat our Doritos. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Okay, I take. Okay, thank you. All right. So as you can see, guys, money works very differently here. They will not take anything that I have touched. Nothing. Nothing at all. Hello. After having some fun at the shop, I met some friendly English-speaking locals who invited me to the main temple complex and reminded me that I was not allowed to touch anything, and especially not to go anywhere near the temple. I took some videos and talked to some locals, keeping a more than respectful distance, and then decided to start the long trek back to my hostel. I only had so many hours of sunlight and was not keen on spending a night in the village. I would say Malana is one of, if not the strangest places I have visited on Earth. It's truly something you can only experience for yourself. It's an ancient and ultra-religious, isolated society hidden in the remote Himalayas under a never-ending cloud of hash smoke. I spent a few more days in Jari at the hostel with my new friends until I made a short 4-hour trek to the next town on the path, the jewel of the Parvati Valley, the town of Kasol. Now, if Goa was a hippie town, Kasol is hippie heaven. Surrounded by trails in every direction, some of the purest mountain nature anywhere in India, it's somewhere I spent a fair bit of time, passing my days by hiking, smoking, and enjoying the local music scene, which consists mainly of Indian psytrance. My favorite day in Kasol went hiking through some nearby villages. It was almost a spiritual experience walking through the endless green mountain passes, through small villages, and hearing a faint, almost hypnotic rhythm of psytrance coming from all around the forest. I eventually got so high I felt like I was being stalked by a tiger, an animal that for some reason I was convinced at the time was living in the area. And after feeling an overwhelming sense of dread that I was being watched by a large feline predator, I hurried down the mountain to get some momos, my favorite Himalayan dish, a tasty Tibetan-style dumpling filled with spicy tender meat. And after some momo and some sleep, I woke the next day and decided it was time to break the smoke, hike, and sleep cycle that defined my last week and finally head out of Kasol. And the next stop was a short 6-hour bus ride away, the town of Manali, a major center for backpacking in the Indian Himalayas. So you know the drill by now. I hopped on a local bus and made my way to Manali. In Manali, I stayed at a place called Tiny Spot Hostel, where I befriended the owners and some fellow travelers. We got to talking one night about where I should go next, and someone suggested I head to a place called Spiti Valley, an extremely high altitude and isolated desert region along the Chinese border. I was told that in the mountains there was a 1,000-year-old Tibetan Buddhist monastery that would occasionally allow travelers to stay inside the monastery as visitors and observers. This seemed like the logical next step on my Himalayan adventure. My plan was to catch the only local bus to Spiti Valley and then spend a few hours hiking through the deserts and mountains to the monastery the next day, and hope the monks would let me stay. So I packed up and left Manali on the local bus, expecting a 6-hour journey through the mountains, but what I got was a 12-hour ride through some of the deadliest roads in all of India, a route where our bus nearly tipped over the cliff twice, and a journey that saw the lush jungles melt away into an unending frozen desert at the top of the world. I arrived in Spiti exhausted. I found shelter in the village of Kaza and decided to rest and prepare myself for the day of hiking ahead. I got a shave from a local barber and brought the supplies that I thought I would need for the hike. I got some much-needed rest before setting out into the desert the next day. In the morning, I started my march across the desert carrying everything I owned on my back. The only thing motivating me was the hope that the monks would give me refuge in the old monastery. The first glimpse I got of the monastery felt like a dream. Surrounded by imposing mountains and rugged terrain, the monastery looked like a castle out of a fantasy novel. It didn't feel real. I made my way to the main courtyard and took a seat, waiting to speak to the monks. After a short wait and some friendly conversation, they showed me to my room and gave me some tea to welcome me to the monastery. This was one of the most accomplished feelings I had ever felt as a traveler. I was living with Buddhist monks in a monastery that was 1,000 years old, and although I wasn't a student, I still spent my time trying to live like one. I would spend my days meditating, eating only what the monks gave me, which was very generous, and I never went hungry. But my favorite way to pass the time at the monastery was, funnily enough, playing cricket with the students in the courtyard. Now, having spent almost 3 months in India, I had time to reflect on what I had seen, done, and experienced, and truly the monastery was exactly what I needed, a place of pure peace and joy. I left the monastery rejuvenated and full of confidence for my next journey, and to keep the adventure exciting, I decided to hitchhike back to Kaza village, and after just a few minutes of waiting, I jumped in the back of a beat-up old work truck and had my first, but definitely not my last, Himalayan hitchhike. I got back to Kaza in record time. After another 12-hour bus back to Manali, I began to plan my next move. I had been in the Himalayas for nearly a month now. Still, I had yet to reach the top of India. My next location was to be the very northernmost part of India, the raw and rugged territory of Ladakh, and I planned to hitchhike across the whole length of it into the dangerous and wild region of Kashmir on the border of Pakistan. So after another absurdly long bus ride, I arrived in the Ladakhi capital city of Leh, an ancient city with a heavy Tibetan cultural influence, full of sandy bazaars, peaceful temples, and ancient towering castles. On my first day in Ladakh, I also met a legend, a fellow 22-year-old backpacker, an energetic Englishman called Rudy. We became friends fast and decided to climb one of the massive mountains that surrounded the city of Leh at sunset one night. It made for an amazing view and a perfect smoke spot. I told him I planned to hitchhike from Leh to Kashmir, and the legend that he is, he decided to join me. We made a plan on the mountain to leave the next day after breakfast, and after gathering supplies, which was mainly an ungodly amount of tobacco, we made our way to the highway for our first of many rides across the great land of Ladakh. And after accidentally burning off a chunk of my hair in the desert, we scored our first ride in the back of an old pickup truck, surrounded by what looked like rusty propane tanks. It's alright. We'll go 2 kilometers further. Just hold on. Alright guys, we first hitch in Ladakh with some weird, sketchy, explosive canisters. I already burned off half my hair, and we got some more burning materials here, of course. Beautiful as guys. Bye bye Leh. Bye bye Leh. Hello, Kashmir. It took us at least 3 rides and a whole day of hitchhiking, but we eventually made it to the first village, a small settlement on the banks of the Indus River, the town of Alchi. We drifted into the town in the back of a big cement truck and explored the village in the morning, visiting the monastery just after sunrise before catching a ride out of town with a friendly local. Our next stop on the road to Kashmir was another small village called Lama Yuru, and we caught a ride there with 2 Tibetan girls who kept playing 2000s pop and picked us some fresh apricots on the side of the road. Definitely our best ride so far. We rolled into Lama Yuru with a whole day to spare, and we spent our day exploring the town's ancient monastery. the sunset over the mountains of Ladakh, we were determined that the next day we would make it into Kashmir. Now, this was July of 2025, and if you didn't know, in April of 2025, one of the biggest terror attacks in Indian history was performed in a mountain town in Kashmir. And after this attack, the entire region was under a strict lockdown, becoming one of the most militarized places in the entire world, and with the government on high alert for another attack. Many tourist sites had been shut down, and many towns had become off-limits to visitors. So it's safe to say this was not the best time we could have been visiting Kashmir, but we were stupid enough to try anyways. So in the morning of the next day, we stuck our thumbs out in the direction of Kashmir and hopped in an oil truck bound for the border of Pakistan. The first ride set an early tone for the day. Our driver had broken the radio that wouldn't shut up, we witnessed the remains of an almost certainly fatal crash off of a cliff, and then we were nearly extorted for money from our driver, which resulted in us getting dropped off at a random town called Kargil near the border of Pakistan. It's safe to say that the day was off to a rough start. And after about an hour of waiting, we got our second ride. 2 Kargil locals in a beat-up old sedan who were driving double the speed limit on some of the sketchiest mountain roads in all of India. They didn't say much to us, but that didn't matter. At the rate we were going to reach Kashmir in record time. However, it's impossible to get that lucky. We ended up stopping for tea in a small village near the Kashmir border, and the 2 locals turned around and demanded nearly $100 from us for the fee of giving us a ride. Needless to say, we refused to be extorted, so we got out and left, content to have a tea break on our own and then wait for another ride. We luckily met some very friendly locals in this town who we shared tea with and then decided to find a spot on the highway to hitch. Little did we know this would be the low point of the entire journey to Kashmir. We waited for hours, getting past hundreds of times. The friendliness of Ladakh had seemingly melted away. We were left anxiously waiting for a ride before sunset. We got desperate and eventually even asked taxi drivers, but they could sense our desperation and gave us ridiculous prices, so we had to decline. We went back to our hitch spot feeling completely and utterly defeated. The sun was setting, both literally and on our dream of reaching Kashmir by tonight. But just when things looked darkest, we got rescued by an absolute legend of a truck driver who agreed to take us all the way to Kashmir and even to the main city of the region called Srinagar. So with our faith in humanity restored, we jumped into another big rig truck and made our way to the border of Kashmir. The border was a military outpost in the middle of a desolate mountain valley, down some of the most dangerous roads in all of India, but despite getting caught in a crazy storm as we were driving next to some very steep cliffs, the ride went very well thanks to our excellent driver, and after about 8 hours of swerving down mountain roads, we would finally make it to Srinagar, the capital of Kashmir. Getting to Kashmir had been a fever dream. After the last 3 days of extreme hitchhiking, we had made it into one of India's deadliest regions, and it started with us saying goodbye to our driver as we got dropped on the side of a random road at 2 a.m. Luckily, a shop owner called us a taxi to one of the only hostels in town, and after our taxi driver tried to convert us to Islam, we arrived at the expectedly empty hostel, and we got some very much needed rest. Waking up the next day, we now knew we were in Kashmir. It's a completely different world from Ladakh. Buddhist temples had been replaced by mosques, and the calm atmosphere had been replaced by a tense, chaotic, and highly militarized city. We explored the bazaar for a bit, then we decided to head to the main attraction, the massive Dal Lake, an alpine lake in the center of the city with excellent views of the surrounding mountains. We hopped in a tuk-tuk to the lake and began to haggle for prices with the locals about taking a boat out until we finally reached an agreeable price and piled onto a boat for a nice Kashmiri sunset cruise. I'm Jack.
Oh, Jack.
Rudy.
Rudy. Okay.
Okay, Mohammed. Mr. Mohammed is our driver. Hello, salam alaikum. Canada. First time Kashmir. Kashmir's best. Jack. Backpack Jack. After a few days in Srinagar, we knew we had to leave. The recent attacks had left Kashmir one of the most militarized regions on Earth, and with the army restricting visitors from most places in Kashmir, the only thing to do was to start the long journey back to Himachal Pradesh, to the town of Dharamshala, a heavenly little mountain town in the Himalayas and the home of the Dalai Lama. But as we now know, after 3 months in India, the road is never straightforward. We made our way to the train station and caught one of the most chaotic and overpacked trains I've ever ridden, Packed like sardines in the hot train car for hours, we eventually reached the end of the tracks and had to continue the route by share taxi. We were ushered into the back of a minivan and packed the van with so many people that we had to sit in the trunk. The ride lasted 10 hours and was one of the most uncomfortable rides of my entire life. A nausea-inducing race down the Kashmiri highways, but after a painful 10 hours, we reached Jammu, the halfway point of our journey. I'm sorry to say, but Jammu might be the worst place I visited in all of India. Seconds after getting out of the taxi, we were aggressively harassed by scammers so bad that we had to shout at them for 10 minutes and nearly have to physically threaten them to leave us alone, only to arrive in a cockroach and bedbug-ridden hotel room that the owner also tried to scam us for to get more money out of us. Then after only sleeping for a few hours, we were denied service at a local restaurant simply for being foreign, and to add insult to injury, every bus to Dharamshala was cancelled because of a worker strike. So being stranded in what I can only describe as the worst city in India, we hired a taxi for about $50 to drive us all the way to the upper part of Dharamshala, and after a fun and comfortable few hours in the taxi, we had finally made it. After over a week of travel, hitchhiking for days to the deserts of Ladakh, sneaking into Kashmir and surviving some of the most overpacked and dangerous trains and buses through the wild mountains of Kashmir, we had finally made it to our slice of paradise, the highest neighborhood in Dharamshala, a place called Dharmkot. Dharmkot was everything we needed. For Rudy, it was where his journey began 3 months before, and coming back was like full circle on his time in India. And for me, it was much needed break from the intense life of living on the road. Dharmkot was a breath of fresh air. I had time to edit videos, go hiking in the mountains, eat nice food at cafes, and smoke and talk with my new friend. It was his last few days in India before heading back to England. And for having a friend to talk to after being alone on the road for so long is something I was very grateful for. And the free time of staying in one place for a while had given me time to catch up with my friends from home. One of them was soon going to join me on my journey in only a month's time when I would leave India for Vietnam. It was a promise we made to each other the previous year, something me and this friend had been talking about since high school. And over a week in Dharamshala, we ironed out the specifics. My friend back home in Wisconsin and me here in India both got our Vietnamese visas and bought our flights to Hanoi, set to meet up for the first time in nearly 8 months at a random Vietnamese hostel in just a month's time. I look back on the Dharmkot days as some of the most fun times in India. It was also at this time that I began to feel an extreme sense of growth. I'd come a long way from my first day in India, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I was feeling like I had really come a long way. I also thought a lot about home these days. I think because Rudy was heading home in a few days as well, we talked a lot about it. And for the first time in my travels, I had felt a little homesick. I first started my life of traveling the previous year in South America. I don't think I felt homesick a single time. In those days, Wisconsin was the last place on earth I wanted to be, and I kept that sentiment up on this trip in Asia. But finally, after having been gone in Asia for 7 months, I was beginning to feel a little homesick. For most of my life, I viewed my home state as a small, cold, and boring place, somewhere with no stories worth telling and no adventures waiting to be had. But now I believe that's a biased view. Wisconsin is where all my best friends live, some who I've known for nearly 20 years now, people that get me more than anyone else on earth, and who I'm truly blessed to have in my life. Not to mention my loving family who have been so supportive of all my crazy adventures. And even though I know they worry sick about me, and even though I still couldn't have been happier to be in India, where I was living up my dream of being a traveler and video creator, part of me still missed that perfect Wisconsin summer, the smell of pine in the air, the taste of an ice-cold beer on the side of the lake, and the friends that make it feel like home. It had finally come time to say goodbye to Rudy. One morning we had our final breakfast chai together before saying our goodbyes as he caught a bus to Delhi. I've said it once and I'll say it again, it's a bittersweet thing about traveling. You share some of the greatest memories of your life with people you just met and might never see again. But everything passes with time, and it eventually came for me to leave Dharamshala as well. And I began my last great journey across India, my time in the remote and mysterious Northeast. I boarded my first flight in 3 months and landed in the far-flung state of Assam, the gateway to northeastern India and the start of my last great Indian adventure. I drifted around here for a few weeks, eventually making it to the very edge of India, the wild tribal state of Nagaland, right on the border of Myanmar, and found myself in a little rice farming village that was one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. I took a bus back into town and on board met some friendly locals around the same age as me who invited me on a trek, coincidentally the very same trek I had come all the way to Nagaland to do, the mystical Zuko Valley. So enjoy this little montage of one of India's most remote treks and something I've never posted to YouTube before, my 12-hour trek through Zuko Valley.
Zuko, this way.
This way. You can capture me or you can capture yourself. Capture whatever, brother.
Oh, in my way. Remember that?
Yeah, yeah. My new local friend Songer invited me to stay at his house in town while I waited for my train out of Nagaland, which he also helped me to buy the tickets for. He was an absolute legend. And after sharing dinner with his family, we hit the club for a few hours before rushing to the train station and boarding my 25-hour train to Darjeeling, one of the last places I would visit in India. By this time, I had only a few weeks before I needed to meet my friend in Vietnam, and I had been practically everywhere I wanted to go in India. I was a combination of exhausted and proud, and with the monsoon in full swing in eastern India, getting pelted with an onslaught of tropical rain for the next week was not what I wanted to do. So in a move I rarely make, I rerouted my flight to Vietnam. Instead of waiting 10 days in the rainy, muddy eastern India, I decided to spend an extra $50 to reroute my flight to Thailand. So now I had a flight in a few days from Calcutta to the Thai coastline, somewhere I knew would be relaxing and I would be able to process, rest, and recover from my long trip in India. It was a trip that profoundly changed me in every way, and that rainy day in Darjeeling, I knew I had gotten all that I needed from India and was finally ready to leave. I caught my last long and uncomfortable Indian bus ride that night, and as the sun rose, I had arrived in the rainy streets of Calcutta. Once the capital of the entire British Raj, this imperial city was my last stop in India, and I decided to have a final day with all of my favorite things in India. Exploring the colorful streets and markets, talking to some of the friendliest people in the world, taking life-threatening tuk-tuk rides, eating street food that definitely shortens my lifespan, and my all-time favorite Indian pastime, sipping a piping hot cup of chai, the greatest of all Indian delicacies. Until night eventually fell on Calcutta, and I got into the back of my last Indian taxi on my way to the airport. The mix of emotions I felt on that ride was like nothing I'd ever felt. It was sadness, joy, loss, gratitude, pride, and hope. Hope that I would never forget all that I learned, saw, felt, and experienced in my 4 months in India. A trip that I thought would make me YouTube famous, but instead did something far better for me. It taught me to believe. To believe in the good of people, to believe that all of us have a place in this world, and most importantly, to take nothing for granted. Not the food you eat, the company you share, the bed you sleep on, not the emotions you feel, good or bad, because in time everything passes. You never know the last time you'll hold someone you care about, or the last time you'll smile, or the last time you just take a moment to feel the presence of your being. The heat in the air, the smell of the spices, the colors dancing in the streets, and the feeling of being okay with just taking a moment to take it all in, without judgment, without fear, and just experiencing that beautiful feeling of being alive.